It took me more than 2 years from printing to finishing this project because I procrastinated so hard on making a fabric cape. But I finally got it done, and in this video I'm going to show you how. After printing the base with my FDM printer, I did my usual steps to hide the print lines. If you want to see all my tips and tricks for that step, go watch my dedicated video for this step, linked in the info box. And the same applies for the resin printed body, where you can also check out my resin printing post-processing tools and methods in a separate video I did. Before I hit the print button on the base, I didn't really think about how I would illuminate the bat signal. But of course it was out of question, it had to be done. The small battery-powered spotlight I used for my 1/6 scale Batman was convenient since there was no cable involved, but it was already quite weak, even for a smaller scale statue, so I knew I had to go bigger. Luckily I had a smart light bulb laying around where I can later adjust the color temperature and brightness, so I went for that. The only issue was that I needed to make some space in the bat signal for the light bulb and the lamp socket, which I also had laying around. I'm usually not using a lot of infill, so it took some time, but it was relatively easy to hollow the bat signal out. Then I ordered a cheap set of metallic craft acrylics, since I don't want to use a whole bottle of the expensive Vallejo colors just to paint the base. To enhance the light reflection inside the bat signal, I tried to paint it white first, but that didn't work too well, so I used aluminum tape and glued that inside, which will work much better. At least I hope. Then I went in with a brighter silver to create a bit more color variation. Afterwards I took care of the light cover that I printed with clear PLA, which you couldn't really tell if you wouldn't know it, but it's still translucent enough to let the light shine through later. The model originally came with sculpted bolts and nuts, but printing this with FDM loses a lot of detail, so I printed that part upside down and with a Z offset to remove those and replace them with real bolts and nuts after drilling a bunch of holes. Then I continued painting the bat signal stand with a dark gray and painted those bricks with different red and brown tones. For the upper trimming and the one in the middle I used bone white and then stonewall gray for the rest. And with that the colors were blocked out and it was time for the fun part, weathering. First I mixed black, white and green craft colors, then I went in with black and white only, and then I also used an oil wash with black, green and brown. And it did turn out a little greener than I wanted, especially on the lower inner part, but no one will see that later anyway. Then I sealed everything up with a matte varnish and glued the whole base together. I still wasn't satisfied with the silver-only look of the bat signal, so I went in with black for more details. What I was also not satisfied with was the look of the screws that attach the bat signal to the glass. I wanted to have the look of bolts, so I bought a bag of assorted decorative gems, searched for the right size and changed the color to something that doesn't look like a fake gem, but a weathered bolt, and then glued that on with superglue. Although I had a look of Batman in mind who only started his crime hunting journey a year or two ago, that bat signal still also needed some weathering to look properly. And then it was time for that step in the project that was the reason I procrastinated on this build for 2 years, the fabric cape. First I googled a cape pattern that I printed out in the size I wanted, traced that on an old piece of cloth and checked whether the size and shape really fits when I put it on Batman's shoulders. I also had to resculpt the cowl a bit with Aves Epoxy Sculpt because the cowl has a hard edge where the sculpted cape would be. When I was satisfied with the fit, I went ahead and used the same template with the actual fabric. Since I don't have a blue Batman yet, and this sculpt reminds me of the Batman version from the Hush comic, I went with blue for this one. And then I asked someone who is better with a sewing machine than me to sew tunnels into the two sides of the cape to put wires in. Then I just needed a good idea how to attach those wires to the statue. And the best idea I was able to come up with was to print a tube where I can stick the wires ends in, and then the tube goes into Batman's chest. So I quickly printed that tube, glued the wires in with 5-minute epoxy, and then I dremeled out a hole in the chest. When that hole was big enough, I used some epoxy sculpt to create an actual pocket inside the chest. Then I hand-stitched together the cape ends to keep them in place and prevent the fabric from sliding down the wire, and afterwards I just needed to dremel away a bit of material on the cowl to get a snug fit. And then it was time to paint Batman. For the skin tone I used my usual technique that you can see in detail in my Tony Starcat sculpt painting video up in the right corner. Since I followed the exact same steps here, I will skip this part in this video. When I was satisfied with the skin color, I used a paintbrush and Imperial Blue as a base for the shading. Then I masked off the eyes and skin and painted the whole cowl with a brighter blue, making sure that I cover everything but the darker color from before can still shine through. And I used the same process and color for the other suit parts. The only issue was that this color didn't really match with the fabric cape. So I mixed tire black into the blue and that came close enough. On this paint chip here you can see a good example of what happens if you have a dust or dirt particle under your paint. When you rip off the masking tape, it will take the loose paint right with it. So I had to fix that small spot as well. Then I took magic blue to create highlights on the cowl and gloves and boots. For the logo I used tile black and then airbrushed some solid black in the middle. Afterwards I also used the magic glue to dry brush the wrinkles, since they are too hard to catch with the airbrush. With charred brown I then went ahead and painted the shoe soles. For the gauntlet blades I wanted to go for a two-colored look, so I base coated them with a solid black, and then I used a sculpted in structure to only paint half of the blades with gunmetal. The pouches were painted with plague brown and a brush for all the hard to reach areas, and then I masked off everything and used the airbrush to get an even coverage. Otherwise I would have had to paint over it 3 times. Then I switched over to leather brown for the actual belt. For the belt buckle I again used black as a base color and then mixed gunmetal and tinny tin. And no utility belt can go completely without weathering, so I did that with gunmetal and a black wash for the buckle and a sponge and leather brown for the pouches. Then it was time to seal everything up. For the fabric part of the suit I used Max Matte, and for the leather parts I was satisfied with the look that the Montana matte varnish already gave me. Afterwards I did some weathering on the shoes with different browns. For that I turned down the air pressure all the way so the airbrush only spitted out the color. For the bat logo I used Vallejo satin varnish that I actually let sit around for a while so that it almost started drying. This way it was not so runny anymore and gave me some uneven texture that adds a bit of realism to the leather look. And then the last step was weathering the tips of the cape and cutting away some loose threads. And then I called it good.